Hello, I'm Julie Henry, and today I'll introduce you to a distinguished group of talented craftsmen who created unique works of art for people to wear, to touch, and to treasure. They were nurtured and trained in Cleveland, Ohio, but today the exquisite metalworks they created are admired, collected, and displayed all around the world. It's a fitting tribute to the man who started it all, Horace Potter. At the very time that Cleveland was poised to become a powerhouse city of steel, Horace Potter opened a studio in 1899 that through the years assured Cleveland's place in the history of crafting precious metals into distinctive forms and designing jewelry of the highest order.
I remember going to Potter Mellen when I was a child, along with my mother, and buying presents for people. And certainly the display was primarily dishes, silver, wedding gifts, plus the jewelry. Well, it was an important gift in its day. I mean, it was like going to any good jewelry shop. And if it was a good jewelry shop, they sold good jewelry.
Well, it was a different world back then, too. I mean, people were very much interested in wearing jewelry.
Potter Studios and Horace Potter were right at the beginning of the arts and crafts movement. They were way ahead of themselves and probably a little bit too far ahead for Cleveland at the time.
He would make trips overseas to buy merchandise, which not too many people were doing here in Cleveland at the time.
We have some interesting pieces of Potter's work. This is a tea strainer, which is perhaps reveals its British inspiration by its function, if nothing else. We know that it's stamped Potter Studios, and the presumption is that that mark was used after Potter returned to Cleveland from his experiences in England. And certainly the style of this piece is very close to the sort of English version of the Art Nouveau. It has much of the curvilinear motifs that one finds in those works, and it's beautifully crafted and as well as being well designed.
Horace Potter's reputation for quality attracted and appealed to skilled artisans of the day. He was a mentor to and gained ultimate respect for designer and silversmith Frederick Miller, whom he later asked to join him at Potter and Mellen. Frederick Miller eventually became owner of the store.
Well, Fred Miller was a silversmith. He made hollowware pieces. He created things like candlesticks.
Throughout his career, Frederick Miller taught at the Cleveland Institute of Art and maintained close artistic ties to an Institute colleague and friend, John Paul Miller.
I didn't want to go to college, and I wanted to go to the art school. I hadn't any idea what I wanted to do, but I liked painting. And Fred Miller, we sat next to each other. I found out that Fred did jewelry. I said, could you teach me how to solder? This is the only collaborative piece that Fred and I ever did. I did the enamel part of it, and Fred did the design of the whole unit. I spent several weeks on each one of these after the silver form was made, gluing all of the little gold pieces to make the butterflies on it, and then put it in the kiln and prayed that it was going to work, because I'd never done anything like it before, and I've never done anything like it since.
Like Horace Potter, Frederick Miller brought artistic and commercial success to the store. His designs extend far beyond jewelry to objects of silversmithing and public pieces such as the bronze cross for St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Cleveland Heights.
Horace Potter obviously had complete command of the technical knowledge as well as creating an object of great beauty.
The artistic heritage of these gifted metalsmiths continues today in the hands of Jim Mazurkowitz, who studied with both Frederick Miller and John Paul Miller, and whose influence he honors every day.
Throughout all of that, there has been a good consistency in that sense of using natural forms in the design, using interesting or ancient objects. I think that's a heritage of his that is very special and unique to Potter and Mellen.
Of course, Potter and Mellen pieces like the beautiful jewelry created by Jim Mazurkowitz have immeasurable aesthetic value. Well, Terry Cavell knows a lot about the value of this level of craftsmanship. She and her husband Ralph are America's foremost experts on antiques and collectibles, the authors of 9 books, an award-winning monthly newsletter, and a popular syndicated weekly newspaper column. They're also serious collectors, and they're proud to include several outstanding Potter-era objects in their personal collection.
Cleveland was one of the centers in the arts and crafts movement. Very few people seem to realize how important it really was. The entire Cleveland School of Artists, starting in about 1910 and working into the 50s, were the leaders in many things, including the jewelry, the silver, the enameling. Now, Horace Potter was very good at arts and crafts, and this is a pair of sugar and creamer I got, which I think is remarkable for the design on it. It had to be early, before World War I, and it was a commercial piece done by the studio, and he put your initials into the piece. This is a piece of early Potter studio jewelry. I went to Potter Mellen, and they have all the pictures, and there was my piece in their archives, which is astounding too, because they have very complete archives. I like it because all the links on this chain, every other one is enameled, which I think is phenomenal. When I got married, if you were married in Cleveland, you had to have a covered bowl. And what they did is they got pieces from China, or we have one that was Pewabic pottery out of Detroit, and we have some that are Pisgah pottery. They got all the major art potteries, and then they made a cover to match. And Mr. Potter bought a lot of Oriental pieces, and he matched them up, and he made these wonderful things. This is another one, which is early Potter studio, and it has a top, which is one of these pieces of an artifact from somewhere. You never knew quite what he was going to do. This is the arts and crafts silver. It's the design is one of the better ones. And this is a Steuben liner that's in here. It's a glass bowl which fit right into the silver piece. It's really a phenomenal piece of silver. Anybody who collects arts and crafts silver would jump at a chance to buy this. This is something they did that also is, I think, amazing. They made jeweled picture frames. This one's silver. They also did them in gold. And I have a hunch that this was a copy of an oil painting. It just looks like it. You wouldn't normally do a miniature like that, but that's a painting that was somewhere in the family. This is another one by the same artist and by Potter Mellen. And look at the work. It's all gold. I'm sorry I don't know who made it. It must have been one of the jewelers who did the gold work. Semi-precious stones. And this is a relative of the lady in the other picture. I have 18,000 books in my library for research. I needed bookends, so I started buying bookends. My limit was $10 for a bookend when I started. Now, I don't know when I got these. I love this pair because they aren't the same, but they are the same, and somebody very cleverly figured that out. And these today, and I know I've had them a long time, so I maybe paid $25 because they were really extraordinary. These today would run anywhere from $300 to $500. I know the Potter pieces that I have seen for sale are a lot more expensive than the Chanel pieces I have seen for sale.
Over the years, the works of these craftsmen have become popular favorites with private collectors around the globe. What's more, the lustrous jewelry, hand-wrought metalwork, and silver-embossed ceramics have found a home in some of the world's finest art museums. Henry Hawley is the former and now retired curator of Renaissance and later Western decorative arts at the Cleveland Museum of Art. He shares some of them with us now.
Horace Potter, we know, spent time in England. He was there in the period of roughly 1908 to 10. I'm not sure exactly the years, but that's approximately when he was there. And we know that he was closely associated with Ashby, who was a major figure of the English arts and crafts movement. We have some interesting pieces of Potter's work. For example, there's pieces here from a group of dressing table objects. And here in the middle, there's a small boss, which is made of cloisonné enamel. And this set, we do have a fairly accurate idea of when it was made, because it was evidently a wedding gift of 1914. So I think we can presume it was made around 1913, perhaps, something like that. In other words, again, in this period, very shortly after his return from England. And in this case, the cloisonné enamel is an old tradition that had been revived in the arts and crafts period. And Horace Potter obviously had complete command of the necessary technical knowledge, as well as creating an object of great beauty. This is another piece which it is unmarked, but in the archives of Potter Mellen there's a drawing which is clearly for this handle, and so it's indubitably the work of Potter Studios. And I think it too probably dates in the period shortly after his return to Cleveland from England. It's made of silver, and then the interior of the bowl is coated with enamel. And this is interesting because according to records and statements made at the time, Horace Potter was particularly adept at enameling. Among the things that Potter's studio made in considerable quantity during the later teens and 20s of the 20th century were these bowls made of ceramic with metal tops, and often, as in this case, there's a piece, I don't think it's really jade, but it looks like jade. It probably comes from the Orient and was bought by them and used for a knot on this bowl. We have one piece of Horace Potter's, or I should say, the Potter firm's jewelry here. This dates from the early 30s, and it's rather late as far as Potter jewelry is concerned, because there were some very beautiful pieces made in this period of 1910 to 20, often employing enamel as part of its decoration. Again, in this case, it is said by the person who gave this jewelry to the museum that the design was by Horace Potter himself.
Now, the arts and crafts movement, which Horace Potter helped introduce in America, was a reaction against the mass production of the Industrial Revolution. Indeed, it was a celebration of individual creativity, craftsmanship, and design. Well, that spirit and heritage lives on today in Jim Mazurkowicz's reputation for using intaglios of the ancient world and creating exquisite 18-karat gold jewelry for the ages. Take a look.
An intaglio is actually the opposite of a cameo. A cameo is layers of different colored agate or onyx, which are carved in a way to cause the figure to be in relief against a background. An intaglio is a reverse of that, in which the image is carved into the stone. It is in exquisite detail. It's just amazing. Now, what you're looking at here is a setup to prepare to make rubber molds of these stone intaglios. So these are actually the ancient stones themselves. And what I've done is built a little wall around each one because I'm going to pour a liquid rubber in there which will set up and form the actual mold itself. These are the actual rubber molds that were taken out of those little cardboard walls. And we have an exact reproduction of the intaglio. So once we have these rubber molds, what I do is take a spoon with hot wax and I simply pour the hot wax into these cavities in the white rubber molds, and it takes a few minutes to cool. And then once I've done that, I pull the waxes out, and here you can see examples of those individual waxes. We then take them and sprue them up on these little blue rods, which ultimately become pouring channels for the liquid molten silver. And at a certain point, I build this up on this rubber mold. At a certain point, I take a canister and I put it over this. And then I fill it with a plaster-like substance, which sets up. After it sets up, I can put it in a kiln, and using a series of heat time sequences, heat this up so that I eventually burn out or melt away all of this wax, but it will leave an exact duplicate copy of that image as a hollow cavity in this plaster mold. So at a certain temperature then, I have a crucible in front of this flask, and I have a pre-weighed out amount of metal, and I melt that with a torch. And I place it in the saddle of the arm of the centrifuge. I push the crucible up, and when the melt is just right, I release the centrifuge, which this is set up in, and it spins around and shoots the hot molten metal into the flask. exactly this tree of what was waxes in the silver. I put the hot flask under water and all of that plaster disintegrates away. And we're left with an exact duplicate in silver. These happen to be silver. We do a lot of them in gold. Once we have it to this point, I saw them off and I refine them, and they're ready to be used in various kinds of jewelry.
Visiting a museum reminds us of how art feeds both the mind and the spirit, and that link between art and spirituality extends far beyond the walls of a gallery. For thousands of years, sacred art objects have played an important role in religions ranging from Christianity to Islam, from Judaism to Buddhism. And for the past century, some of Potter & Mellen's most impressive pieces have been created for use in the religious realm.
Think in terms of your own family when you want to build a house and you have that dream house that you want to build that is just going to be just such a way that you've always been dreaming about. This is the home of God. And the people really wanted to make it beautiful and reminiscent of God's home. I just was totally amazed when I realized the church was dedicated in 1935, that it was built during the Depression. And it was just amazing that people could come together, raise the money, and put together such a magnificent structure. It probably was a year after I'd actually gotten here. I didn't even know it existed, and one day I was going through, I had my own chalice, and I saw the box, and he opened it up, and I said, wow, where did this come from? And the associate at the time, he'd been here longer than I had been, he took one look at it and he said, oh, you have to hear the history of that chalice. It seems that the people got together in the parish and donated their stones and their gold to help build that, to make that chalice. And again, it's just sort of a sign of a family kind of relationship with the church. And I was just totally amazed at the beauty of it, at this chalice. So when we gather here in his home, we do as he asked, and we look to the scriptures. We recall the events of Holy Thursday, the day before Jesus died, and he had promised to give his body and blood to eat and drink. So we truly believe that it's the precious blood and the precious body of the Lord in the bread and the wine. And so the chalice plays a very significant force.
Indeed, a force conveyed by a collective sense of the divine and manifested through the hands of Horace Potter's inspired metalsmiths.
This is a credit to who and what they are and the beauty of this chalice and the fact that they continue to work. It's a true showing of their craftsmanship and their ability to bring about something sacred.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Potter & Mellen Studios created this menorah, and it was created as a gift to the temple in Cleveland, Ohio from Mrs. Burt Keller in memory of her dear father, Isaac Edward Rose. And when they created it, they must have really talked a lot, because they came up with a beautiful bench menorah, which is the one that has the back And traditionally, you really are supposed to have the menorah seen by the public. So in historic times, in the Middle Ages, they put a bench on the back or a back on the back of the menorah so that they could be seen from the outside of the house. Grapes, beautiful grapes all throughout it, and which is a fabulous symbol of of Israel, of the land of Israel, one of the 7 species. Grapes are very important in Israel, and you can see that as a motif. Also the Star of David, one of the oldest symbols of Judaism, is in this menorah, and it has a mica back to it. So when we do light the candles, you'll be able to see how the light just beautifully radiates from this circular Star of David right here. It also has a beautiful silver, it's called overlay, where it's cut out and placed on top. The enamel is just beautiful colors repeated over and over again, the green, the very lovely kind of gold color, the blue. And the Hebrew here is Rock of Ages. It's a song of freedom and a fighting of history of the people. שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Amen.
The legacy of Horace Potter and the incredible artisans that followed in his footsteps is how they've helped instill in each of us a deep appreciation for individual craftsmanship, pure design for design's own sake, and impeccable creativity of the highest order. The enduring beauty of this glorious metalwork transcends time and place to become a classic. And the rich and colorful history we've explored today is only the first chapter in a story that is still unfolding. I'm Julie Henry. Thanks for watching.